In our top story this hour, South Africa's unemployment rate has worsened. Figures released by Statistics South Africa show that the unemployment rate for the third quarter rose to 29.1%. This is the highest unemployment level in more than 11 years. The unemployment rate stood at 29% in the second quarter, and over the past quarter, the number of unemployed people grew by 78,000, while those in employment grew by only 62,000. The number of discouraged workers increased by 44,000 during the quarter. All right, and for the latest on this issue now, we joined from our Pretoria Studios by Statistician-General Risenga Maluleke. Good afternoon to you, SG. Thank you so much for joining us here on SA Today this afternoon. Now, the actual number of unemployed people rose from 4.5 million last year to 6.7 million now. This is quite a drastic measure here if you look at it, and the worst in 11 years.
Well, for us as statisticians in official practice, we don't feel best or worst. We just make numbers available. And in this regard, as was in the last quarter, the number of unemployed people in South Africa is sitting at 6.7 million. The only difference is that as of the last quarter, the increase on unemployment has been by about 62,000 persons quarter on quarter. But the unemployment rate went up to 29.1%. Now, obviously, since 2008, unemployment has been rising steadily, coming out of the mid-20s and now sitting at 29.1%. Now, that's when we look at the formal unemployment rate, which only looks for people who are looking for work actively. When we look at the discouraged work seekers, who are 2.8 million over and above the 6.7 million persons, plus another 700,000 people who, for whatever reason, they didn't look for employment, but would have taken up employment had it been available. We are talking of 10.3 million persons, and these people altogether form what we call the expanded unemployment figure, which then in terms of percentages sit at a rate of 38.5%.
Now, let's just also break the numbers down in terms of gender and race. We have Black African women the most vulnerable with an unemployment rate of over 30%.
Generally, Africans and coloreds are vulnerable to labor markets, but it's even worse for Africans, both men and women, in this particular quarter 3 of 2019, where African men have actually gone beyond the ceiling of 30%, sitting at more than 32%, and African women sitting at 34.3%, which is the highest amongst the race groups, racial groups, as well as amongst your gender perspective. So when you look at your whites in general, they are below 10%. Whether you look at men or women, they are below 10%. And when you contrast them with Africans, it's a lot more expanded. But beyond that, let us look at young people aged 15 to 24 years. We have this age cohort being vulnerable to labor markets as it happens to African women in particular. And they are sitting at about 58.2% of unemployment rate. And when you look at those with less than matric in that age cohort of 15 to 24 years, they are way beyond 62%. And about 3.3 million of those are not in employment, education, or training.
So you also have the number of employed persons increasing by, 62,000, while the number of unemployed persons increased by 78,000. So a bit of gains there, but at the same time, the loss is much greater.
What happens is that while the number of the employed persons has been increasing steadily, and we can actually look over the past few years, the number of employed people has been increasing. But the number of those that are unemployed is actually increasing at a pace much more higher than those that are employed. But not only that, is because those that are unemployed, about 71% of those, 70.9% to be exact. So out of the 6.7 million, more than 4 million have been on long-term unemployment, meaning that they have been unemployed for a period of 12 months or more.
And we also have a large number of people who have stopped looking for jobs. Perhaps they are a bit discouraged to look for jobs.
Certainly, those ones do fluctuate. As we will remember, in the last quarter, they were about 2.7 million, but in the first quarter, they were closer to 3 million. But what happened is in the last quarter, second quarter of 2019, many of the discouraged work seekers had actually gone out of the discouraged status to go and look for employment. And we will remember that during the campaigns for the 2019 elections, general elections, a lot of encouragement was made by all political parties about their zeal to want to create employment, and people went out there looking for employment. Now, back to the third quarter, this number of discouraged work seekers has increased by about 62,000 persons quarter on quarter to sit at about 2.8 million people. Now, those ones are people who are no longer looking for employment. They have looked for employment, and until they are discouraged, they are seated at home. And for a variety of reasons, largely due to the fact that they can't find employment. But some of them have depleted their resources which they use for going to look for employment. And when you look at provinces, generally your rural provinces like the Eastern Cape, Limpopo, KwaZulu-Natal, Northern Cape, the Northwest, have higher proportions of your discouraged work seekers, because these people, the people in those provinces, are far away from centers that tend to create employment.
Yeah, indeed. So as we said, Statistician-General, that this is the highest unemployment level in more than 11 years here in the country. It's not all bad, though, because employment increased in 3 of the 4 sectors in the third quarter, with the formal sector recording the largest employment increase of about 43,000.
Yes, we have seen employment in the formal sector increasing. We have also seen employment in the primary sector, as in mining as well as in agriculture. So when you look at mining, quarry, and as well as agriculture, forestry and fisheries, employment has increased. But also when you look at other sectors like your construction, your retail, your trade, as well as your manufacturing and utilities, we have lost employment. So the number of sectors that have lost employment compared to those that have created employment, those that lost employment tended to be weighing a lot more on those that created employment. But also, if you look at the structure of our employment in the country, about 30% or a third of those that are employed are in elementary work as well as in domestic work occupations.
All right. Time constraints, we have to leave it at that. But thank you so much for coming through. Statistician-General Risenga Maluleke joining us now live from our studios in Pretoria, talking to us about the latest figures released by Stats SA, indicating that we are now sitting with the highest unemployment level in more than 11 years. That, of course, is a developing story. We'll get more reaction to it when the show continues.